All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another month of Dig Your Dinner. This month's topic is bountiful blackberries. I apologize that we are not able to be there with you in person and live this month. Chelsea and I have been tied up at another engagement that has popped up on our calendars. However, we did want to get this wonderful information to you, and it seems like a lot of you are interested in blackberries. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So, of course, when it comes to fruits, I always like to give a plug for the Midwest Home Fruit Production Guide. This is our pretty much go-to publication for any kind of fruits production within the Midwest, as the title implies, at K-State. So this is the main one we like to guide people towards when it comes to growing fruit. There are also lots and lots of other publications on BlackBerry specifically out there within various extension units. I'd always say just look for publications that are nearby to your local growing conditions. And with blackberries specifically, you need to keep in mind that this is one fruit that is particularly prone to freeze damage. So, like in this Iowa State publication, great information in it, but it also says that they don't grow very well in Iowa, so there's not a ton of information there. So you do want to actually pay attention to which states, specifically with blackberries, you're looking at, because the northern ones aren't going to have particularly informative information for you when it comes to actually being able to grow them, because they can't grow them there. So, at a glance, looking at blackberries, there are a few factors that you should be keeping in mind. They are a biennial fruits, meaning that their production cycle goes over 2 years, and we're going to talk about that. They are classified by their growth habits. So, there's actually three different types of growth habits that they have. They are the erect, semi-erect, and trailing types. We'll go over those. As I mentioned, they are extremely sensitive to extreme colds, so you will want to be watching the types of varieties you are trying to incorporate, and definitely be paying attention to your planting area. If you're here in the KC area, you should be able to get by with growing them here. However, if you are further north from Kansas City, you may start running into some issues. Overall, however, blackberries are a very simple, very easy fruit to be able to grow. So there's not a ton for us to be going over. So I am going to point you towards a handful of different publications here, just when it comes to various maintenance topics on blackberries. So if you weren't aware, if you ever see brambles mentioned in any kind of maintenance, catalogs or what have you, blackberries fall into that category. So blackberries and raspberries specifically are brambles. They are self-pollinating, meaning they only need one variety to be able to fruit. And the difference between your blackberries and your raspberries, or the primary ones or difference you're going to be noticing aside from color, is actually the cores of the fruit. So your raspberries will have a hollow core, whereas your blackberries are solid all the way through. But again, remember these are perennial plants with biennial canes, so they last from year to year, but the canes themselves live for 2 years. So we'll go over that right here. So when I mention biennial canes, you need to know that there are two different types of canes that fall into categories. So that you have your primicanes and your floricanes. Your primicanes are your first year canes. These actually do not fruit yet. So say you already have an actively growing blackberry bush in your yard right now, or a bramble. If you have any shoots pop up this year, those would be your primo canes. You're not going to get fruit off of those, but next year on those canes, that is when they're going to turn into floricanes, where they will then flower and produce your fruit. So it's very important when you see all these shoots popping up, specifically through the year, because I've had gardeners say this to me before. Well, I have shoots from my blackberries popping up all over the place, so I just cut them back. Is that okay? Well, no, not really, because you just cut off next year's fruit. So you need to keep in mind that those canes do perform a purpose, and actually, after they are floricanes and they flower and fruit for you, they are going to naturally die off on their own. So you'll see in this photo on the right here, there's both your primicanes and your floricanes, but with your floricanes, I would venture to guess that those are already or have already fruited, because those canes look dead. And essentially, what happens is after they're done fruiting, they die back. So that would be your indicator to go in and cut those dead branches out. So as I mentioned, there are several different growth types of blackberries. You have your erect, semi-erect, and trailing, and there are different traits associated with each of these types. So with your erect, these are going to be upright and generally thorny. So these will have thorns. They don't require support, but I do have an asterisk there because generally speaking, there will be at least a single guide wire of support just to sort of attach the plant to and keep it contained. However, it's not going to trail over or fall in your way necessarily if you do have a fully upright variety. These ones specifically are going to be a little bit more winter hardy and they are going to have actually sweeter berries. But again, the trade-off there is they're covered in thorns, so you have to keep that in mind. Semi-erect are much more popular, or I'd say equally as popular because there are some erect varieties out there that actually are quite popular. But these ones will be both thornless and thorny. They are actually going to have higher yields. They do need some support, however, and they are going to have tart to sweet fruit. So, um, when I say semi-erect, what I mean is you see that photo on the right there where you see trailing and erect. It's going to be essentially right there in the middle. It's going to be somewhat trailing, somewhat standing tall. And so it's going to be sort of a mixture of those two. Now, looking over at the trailing variety on the bottom, you can also look at these traits where it has the least winter hardiness. However, you can obviously train it to grow along something. So a lot of people will prefer these because it does essentially vine for you. Um, it can both have thorns and be thornless. It absolutely needs support because it doesn't support itself, and it will have large and sweet berries. So just some factors to keep in mind as you're looking through types of blackberries when you're choosing what you're wanting to work with. Now, as far as variety selection goes, two of the ones that I know that Giving Grove here in Kansas City actually uses, and ones that I've found myself that have been quite successful are the Natchez and Caroline varieties. Now, Natchez is probably the go-to that I always recommend to people because of personal experience. However, there are others out there that would be good for you as well. But the Natchez always has very large, delicious berries, and this is from years of experience working with that plant. So it's a very good, very hardy variety, upright and vigorous, and you get a nice spring harvest out of it. Your Caroline variety, on the other hand, is a fall bearing variety. So that's kind of what's special about it. Instead of getting that spring harvest, you're actually getting a harvest all the way from August through October, which is kind of rare with your blackberries. So if you're looking to have some berry production at the end of the year as opposed to beginning of the year, it's kind of special. Those are also upright, productive, and hardy. I've seen that they, at least in the Kansas City area, with my experience, they have a little bit more tartness to them, and they're a little bit smaller of a berry. Not quite as good of a berry, I'd say, as the Natchez one, but still, perfectly edible and good to go. If you do want to look at even more variety selections that are out there, you can always look at the MF 1028 publication, which is small and tree fruit cultivars, and that is on our KSRE bookstore website. As far as planting blackberries go, there's a few things you should keep in mind. So as with all of our fruits and vegetables, full sun is always going to be ideal. Blackberries in particular are very prone to root rot and just root issues in general. So depending on the variety that you are working with, it'll actually almost prefer to have sandy soil sometimes because it doesn't want that moisture there for very long at all. You definitely want to be avoiding low-lying areas and just make sure you've got well-draining soil in general. That soil should also have a slightly acidic pH of 6.0 to 6.5, ideally. So you might have to do some soil mending and acidification there to get it to that point. And then when you're planting the plants and spacing them out, and you can do this either with potted plants or with your bare root plants, you're going to want to space your plants out by 3 feet between them. And then when you space your rows out, you're going to want to account for the ultimate width of the plant. So it says here 8 feet to 12 feet, which may seem excessive, but you need to remember that ultimately these plants themselves are going to be about 3 feet wide at a certain point. So really, it's about 6 feet to 7 feet that you're going to have between those rows. The best planting time in general for your blackberries is always going to be early spring because that's going to give you enough time for those plants to fully establish throughout the year and to get your primocanes growing so they can be floricanes next year. When it comes to trellising your blackberries, there are lots and lots of varieties of trellises out there, and it's kind of dependent on the variety of blackberry that you're working with. Now, that's as my point there says, depends on your growth type. So when you have two vertical wires, as in top and bottom, this is going to be ideal for your either erect varieties, just because you can directly fasten them to them and keep them a little bit more secure and standing upright and contained. But obviously, your trailing varieties as well is going to grow a little bit more like a grapevine. Then when you're looking at two plus horizontal wires, that's when you're somewhat getting into that realm of just trying to contain the plants in general, because you've got your erect and semi-erect varieties, but they can tend to lean in different directions, right? So that's essentially going to keep them contained and not growing out into your walking and maintenance areas. So there's a couple of different forms that you'll see here, especially the one on the left. That's quite common. We just have two essential like crosses on both ends, and then those are fastened by wires, and that essentially creates a little box that keeps those plants inside. What's even more common, or what's becoming much more common, is actually the V shape um, support. And essentially, here you just take two T-posts and have them slightly angled going outwards, so that you have support both on the top and the bottom as those canes are starting to form, keeping the plant even more contained. If you want to learn much more about trellising systems with blackberries, there's a lot of great publications out here, but this one from IFAS, or the University of Florida, is a particularly good one. So I'd recommend looking into that. Like I said, there's lots of stuff that you can know when it comes to trellising. So rather than talk on it for 2 hours here, I'd recommend you look at this publication. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out to me and we can discuss it more. Now, when it comes to pruning blackberries, as I mentioned, you don't want to remove your actively living flora canes. So once those canes have died, you can obviously remove them whenever. However, when it comes to your living flora canes, there is a bit of pruning that you can actually still do. There's a kind of an example here on the bottom two photos, where essentially you'll see the fully grown, outstretched flora canes in early spring. And you can still cut those back to about 3 feet tall, and they're going to produce well for you. That's just going to help you contain the plants a little bit more and direct that energy a little bit more towards producing large and good fruit. If you want to learn even more about pruning your brambles in general, this publication with KSRE, the Raspberries and Blackberries publication, goes even further into in depth with that. So when it comes to harvesting your blackberries, there's a few aspects you should keep in mind. You want to try to harvest them early in the morning, just so that they don't get stressed out by the heat as you're working with them, because the heat can tend to make them senesce quicker. You also want to be waiting until your fruits in general are fully black. So you may be looking at the fruits and say, oh, well, a few pieces of this are still red. Maybe I can pick it now and I'll just ripen inside. Actually, they don't really tend to ripen anymore after they've been picked off the plant. So you want to allow them to fully ripen on the plant before you pick them. You also want to be sure that you're not overpiling your fruits, because this is a more tender berry. So if you tend to, just get tons and tons of berries, well, if you throw those all into the same container, eventually the weight of those berries is going to be crushing the ones that are on the bottom. So you do want to try to limit it to about a 3 or 4 inch layer and then start a new pile. Also, eat them soon after harvest. They tend to rot pretty quickly, so within 3 to 4 days, if you are keeping them refrigerated. And then I would say as well to wait on washing them until right before you're about to eat them, just to prevent any mold from forming on them. When it comes to pests and disease for your blackberries, luckily there's not that many. As I mentioned, this is a fairly simple fruit to grow. However, there is a few ones listed here. So anthracnose can be a common thing to see, depending on how bad it is, it will dictate what you need to be doing. If it's severe enough, and I haven't mentioned, but the anthracnose is the top photo on the right here. If it's severe enough, you may just need to remove the whole plant and destroy it so it can't infect your other plants. However, there are fungicides out there that are labeled for blackberries, and those can, timed correctly, treat your anthracnose issues. Verticillium wilt and Phytophthora root rots are two rot related issues and fungal issues that you can get in your plants. Um, if these are ones that you are seeing, unfortunately, the recommendation is again to destroy the plant so that it isn't going to affect others. And then you just need to really try to improve the drainage of your soil before replacing those. And then cane borers are an insect that is a beetle that will actually puncture the tips of your canes when they are feeding and laying eggs. So when they do that, you will see two big puncture holes on the top, and then you'll see kind of a girdle line as you see in this bottom right photo. And to get rid of that, essentially all you have to do is prune below the girdle and then destroy the tips that are removed. But just keep in mind that you do need to be destroying those to be containing that insect. Then I always like to throw something fun in at the ends of these. So, did you know that in medieval Europe and beyond, thorny hedgerows were filled with blackberry brambles, which acted as a natural form of barbed wire fencing? So, since barbed wire fencing didn't quite exist yet, just thorny hedgerows would be what keeps your livestock in and your people out, and it was quite efficient at doing so. So with that, I am going to throw it over to Chelsea, and I know we're not live right now, so unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer questions live today. However, if you have any questions, here's my email address, as well as our Master Gardener hotline phone number. Feel free to send any of those questions our way, and we're happy to help you out. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, my name is Chelsea King, and I'm the Nutrition, Food Safety, and Health Agent here with K-State Research and Extension in Johnson County. And I'm going to talk about the nutrition of blackberries and kind of how to use them once you have grown them. So we know that blackberries are a nutrition powerhouse, that 1 cup of blackberries has only about 60 calories, so it is low calorie food. It has about 14 grams of carbohydrates, 2 grams of protein, 8 grams of fiber, and then it is also has our vitamins and minerals like vitamin C, vitamin K, folate, magnesium, and is about 88% water. So obviously it's a very hydrating food as well. The 8 grams of fiber is actually pretty substantial for 1 cup of blackberries. So it is a high fiber food and really helps to contribute to our fiber intake over the course of the day, which I'll talk about in the coming slides. So from the health benefits perspective, we know that blackberries are rich in antioxidants and polyphenols. So we specifically have what we call anthocyanins, which are any of our fruits and vegetables that have that kind of deep purple, almost black colors. So that those deep purples and even the lighter purples and the blues are going to be anthocyanins. They are a rich antioxidant that help to protect the cells from free radicals and from damage. We do know that blackberries are a low glycemic food, meaning that when you eat them, it doesn't spike the blood sugar quite as quickly as a high glycemic food. And so this may help support healthy blood sugar regulation by consuming blackberries. We know that blackberries can also support bone health in a different capacity than what we might normally think of when we think about bone health. We think about our calcium and our vitamin D, but vitamin K and magnesium are also very important nutrients when we think about the absorption of our minerals to support our healthy bones. The blackberries are also beneficial when we talk about immune health. So they are high in vitamin C, provide a lot of those antioxidants, which help to protect our bodies. And it also is rich in fiber, which we know that our immune system is really originates from our gut health. And so by feeding our bacteria in our gut healthy fibers from blackberries, we know that we can support that immune system, not only from our vitamins and minerals, but from our fiber as well, and our anthocyanins and our antioxidants. We also know that research shows that blackberries, specifically the kind of purple blue color, is going to have a brain health protective mechanism. So there's a lot of different reasons why, primarily those antioxidants, polyphenols, and all of those other vitamins and minerals, and that it's a high water food. We know that it also may support your cardiovascular function. Same thing, those rich antioxidants, the polyphenols, the vitamins, the minerals, fiber. All of these things go hand in hand with supporting our cardiovascular function. And lastly, we know that blackberries may improve digestion and gut health. Again, 1 cup contains about 32% of our daily fiber needs, which for most females, we need about 25 grams of fiber per day, while males need kind of on the upper end of 30 to 35 grams of fiber per day. So when we talk about culinary uses, there's a lot of different ways that blackberries can be used. We have blackberries are kind of actually one of those fruits that can be used in sweet or savory dishes. So we know that our more savory dishes are going to be our sauces, our marinades, and our glazes. And then we know that obviously our salads and pairing a berry with cheese is going to be a more savory dish. We recently had an event that we had catered pork chops and they had a blackberry like maple glaze on it and it was delicious. So those savory dishes, adding some of that sweetness from the fruit really helps complement it. And then, of course, we have all of our sweet dishes. Our crisps and our cobblers are probably two of the most common ones that we will find our blackberries in, as you can see in that picture. But blackberries are also used in other desserts. Thinking about our scones, muffins, cakes. We also have our cold desserts, so a blackberry mousse or blackberries with cheesecake, like a blackberry sauce on cheesecake. And then, of course, we have our traditional like preservation, so jams and spreads. And then they're also a really great addition to drinks and smoothies. The one thing to note with blackberries compared to other berries is they are a little bit of a more seedy fruit. And so if you are doing something like a drink or a smoothie and you have these blackberries that are very seedy, you might have some seeds in them. Same with our sauces and marinades and glaze. We may want to strain those seeds out in order for whatever we are using it to be a little more palatable to the taste. So with storage, we do want to make sure that we are storing our berries in the refrigerator. All berries need to be stored in the refrigerator, including blackberries, especially if they're not going to be consumed a day or two. Now, the caveat is that if you're growing your own blackberries, harvesting them and consuming them at room temperature, you're going to have a stronger, intense flavor. If you've ever had fresh blackberries or really any fresh berries, strawberries, blueberries, that flavor is more intense when it's at room temperature. However, we do know that deterioration of berries can happen quite quickly. And so if we're not consuming that fruit within a day or two, we will want to make sure it is stored in the refrigerator. The key with most berries is that we do not want to wash them until right before consumption. The excess moisture actually promotes spoilage, molding, and makes the quality deteriorate faster. So in order to get around this, you want to wash them right before you use them, and then make sure that you're drying them off with a paper towel if they are damp, and you are going to continue to store them in the refrigerator. So let's say you wash too many and you don't eat them all or you don't use them all. If you do put them back in the refrigerator, you just want to make sure that you are drying them as good as possible to get that extra moisture off. Some interesting flavor blends when we talk about a use. Orange, lemon, cinnamon, nutmeg, those flavors actually tend to blend really well with our blackberry flavors. So picking the perfect blackberry, when choosing fresh blackberries, we really only want to choose those that are that deeply purple, almost black color. Those that are that more red or paler purple, as you can see in this photo, we kind of have some of those red ones at the back. Those are actually not ripe yet. You can certainly pick them and eat them, but the flavor is not going to be there and that sweetness is not going to be there. They need to ripen fully to get all of the benefits from the antioxidants and anthocyanins to making sure that they have all the time they need to develop all and get all those vitamins and minerals, which then when we consume them, we benefit from them. Well, some fruit can ripen at room temperature once it's picked. So, for example, your blackberries, if you pick them too early, they might continue to ripen, but their flavor is really not going to intensify and get any sweeter. You do want to make sure that your blackberries, when you're picking them, they should have a ripe, pleasant aroma. And of course, you want to avoid blackberries that are too soft, that they're kind of a dull in color. If they have a mildewy smell or have evidence of mold on them, you definitely don't want to consume them. As you can see in this picture, the blackberries have lots of like little nooks and crannies. So if you do see the slightest bit of mold, it's not as easy as just taking it off or not eating that section or making sure that we're not ingesting it. There could be a lot of mold or other hidden things in those little cracks that we're not seeing. So if the berry is perishing and isn't the best of quality, just pitch it and find some other berries that are a better quality. So we're going to move into the preservation method now for our blackberries. You can either water bath or pressure can when you do home food preservation of blackberries. The best method is the hot pack method, which we're going to, the best method is the raw pack method. That was a typo there, which we're going to talk about in the next couple bullet points down. But we do need about 8 pounds of blackberries for 9 pints. We want to make sure that we're using those sweet, ripe berries with uniform color. Anytime we're doing home food preservation, we don't want to use any produce that is kind of on its last leg or that is showing signs of deterioration. We want to make sure that we are having the best produce, picking it and harvesting it and preserving it as quickly as date from that harvest as possible. We do want to make sure that we're only washing a small amount of berries at one time and that we are draining them. We take the cap off if there is one and any stems if necessary. And then to raw pack them. And so this is just a preserving them kind of in a whole berry, not doing a jam or jelly at this point. But you're going to fill your jars with the raw berries, kind of shaking them down. You want to make sure that it's as compact as possible because they will shrink during that preservation process. And then you're going to get some floating up to the top. So you do want to make sure that they're pushed down as tight as they can be. You then want to cover either with a hot syrup, 100% juice, or water. And water works perfectly fine, especially if you're going to be adding sugar, if you're going to use them for like a cobbler or a buckle or anything like that. So preserving them in water is perfectly okay. If you want to preserve them in syrup, you can. You just are going to be getting more added sugar when you do it that method. You do want to leave a 1/2 inch headspace and adjust the lids and process accordingly based on where you are at altitude wise and the method that you are using, either water bath or pressure canning. So when we talk about blackberries and the preservation in the dehydration method, the current recommendation is to not dehydrate whole blackberries, and that's really due to their high water content and then the seeds. Now, you can, however, cook and strain the blackberries and remove the seeds and then make it almost like a pureed fruit leather. So here's just a kind of high level overview of how to make fruit leather from any fresh fruit. And so you're going to take your, again, slightly ripe fruit. In this method, when we're doing a leather where we're already cooking it down, having slightly overripe fruit is okay. If you're doing it like the whole berries, you would obviously want to make sure that you're getting the best quality for that one. And then you're going to puree the fruit until smooth. You're going to add a lemon juice or ascorbic acid, which helps to prevent the color from darkening. And then you can either sweeten it with corn syrup, honey, or sugar. And the best long-term storage is going to be corn syrup or honey because it's going to prevent the crystallization that can often happen if you're using sugar. You'll see that you'll get some crystallization with long-term storage. The other thing is applesauce can be added to extend any fresh fruit. So it decreases the tartness a little bit. Applesauce is a naturally sweet food, and then it often can make the texture also more pliable and smooth of the fruit leather as well. You do want to dry your fruit leather at 140 degrees, and you want to dry it until it is pliable, but and a little sticky, a little tacky, but not to the point where it is over excessively. So a little bit, you don't want to over dry it. You want to have a little bit of tackiness, but still be dry and pliable. So with our blackberries, we can definitely freeze them. That is a very common method for food preservation. It's quick, easy, and don't need a lot of equipment. So with our berries, we can either freeze them using a syrup pack, which is basically a syrup ratio, leaving headspace because you're going to have some expansion when it freezes. You can also do a sugar pack. And so this is basically you're mixing 3/4 cup sugar with about a quart of berries, give or take. And so you just kind of coat the berries in that sugar, and the syrup and the sugar pack do help from a preservation perspective. But also, if you are going to add sugar after or in your recipe, then you might want to leave that out and do the dry pack method. And so the dry pack method basically is you're going to flash freeze the berries on a frozen tray and then pack them into containers as soon as they're frozen. And when you do it this way in the flash freezing on like a cookie sheet or a tray or something like that, the berries then don't stick together. So you're not going to get kind of one big clump in your bag or storage container. You are able to take out a half a cup or however much you need. So now moving into some recipes to kind of round out what do you do? We've talked about the health benefits, we've talked about preserving them, and now let's talk about some recipes. So this is actually a really unique one that I personally didn't think of pairing together until I saw it somewhere in a magazine and thought this sounds really delicious. And I tried it and kind of put my own spin on it. And it is very delicious and kind of a unique taste. So it is a blackberry goat cheese grilled sandwich. And so you're going to want to use like a thicker bread. You don't want to obviously use just your traditional sandwich loaf that you might buy from the grocery store. You want to use a brioche bread or another thick cut bread. I've done this with thick cut sourdough bread and it's delicious on that. You, of course, are going to kind of make it a more traditional grilled cheese where you're going to have your butter. You're going to butter just one side of the bread. You're going to mix the goat cheese, and you can either get like a log of goat cheese and crumble it up yourself, or you can buy the pre-crumbled goat cheese, and then you're going to get the whipped cream cheese. The whipped is just a little bit better because of the texture. If you don't have whipped cream cheese, you can certainly buy the regular and just whip it with a hand mixer to make it a little bit fluffier. And then with the blackberries, you want to gently mash the blackberries. I don't like to keep them personally whole. I like to mash them down a little bit. And then I'm going to mix that cream cheese, goat cheese mixture and just gently stir my blackberries. And I like to add a little bit of fresh mint. You could certainly do fresh basil or any other herb of your choice. And then you're going to spread that mixture onto your loaves, your sides of your bread, and then a little bit of drizzle of honey. So a little sweet, a little savory. And then you're just going to place that bread on top and then just grill on your griddle until they are golden brown. Blackberries are also used in a lot of different beverages. So we traditionally think about our smoothies or often added just to drinks to kind of spruce up their appearance by just having some blackberries floating in whatever beverage of your choice. There's obviously lemonade, blackberry lemonade, but this one is actually a blackberry basil green tea. So green tea we know has a lot of antioxidant properties that is good for our health in many different ways. So this uses tea bags. So you're going to have your green tea that you're going to make just using boiling water and kind of steep it yourself. You can certainly buy bottled green tea if you choose to go that route. Just definitely watch for the added sugar. I recommend that you buy unsweet green tea if you are buying the bottled version. You are going to add your blackberries. You're going to crush them up a little bit. You're going to add some honey to cut kind of the tartness of the green tea. And then you're going to add some fresh basil and a lemon that is juiced. You're just going to kind of mix that all together and refrigerate it until cold. And then you can serve over ice, and then obviously add some more kind of whole basil, or excuse me, whole blackberries in there, and some little more fresh basil for garnish. So, we think about our blackberry crumb cakes and crumbles and all those things, and often they can be quite unhealthy. And so this is a kind of a lightened up version of a blackberry crumble, or a crumb cake is what this one's called. So it uses oats, and oats have a lot of fiber, a lot of vitamins and minerals that are good for our heart health as well as cholesterol and gut health, and uses only about a half a cup of regular all-purpose flour. The overall sugar quantity in this recipe is a little bit lower, with only about a half a cup of brown sugar going in the actual dish, and then a little bit more on the top. But we have butter, milk, eggs or egg substitutes, as well as our blackberries. And then the topping is just kind of a traditional oat, brown sugar, pecan crumble. So the directions are listed there. You do want to process the oats into a flour. And so to do that, you can just take your standard food processor, put your oats in, and then pulse them and blend them until they become a flour. And then you're going to measure your flour and mix all of your other ingredients in. And this mixture is done mixed in a 9-inch square baking pan and then baked for about 45 minutes. And then, if you don't do home food preservation or you're intimidated to try canning a jam or jelly, there are some great freezer recipes out there. And so this is just a very simple freezer blackberry jam from the Ball cookbook. And so it uses 3 cups of crushed blackberries, or about 4 pints. It uses 1 3/4 cup of unsweetened applesauce, or you can use any other fruit juice, like a cranberry mixture might be good. The key here is just to make sure that it is 100% fruit juice. And then you're going to add a low or no sugar needed pectin. And so this is great for recipes. Most of your jams and jellies traditionally have a lot of sugar. And so the pectin that is used is a different type. And because this doesn't have as much sugar as your standard canned home food preservation blackberry jams, you're going to make sure that you get that different type of pectin, a low or no sugar needed or added pectin. And then we have about 3/4 cup to a cup of honey, kind of depending on your taste preference. If you like it a little bit sweeter, go to that more 1 cup. And if you like it the lower, go to the 3/4 cup. So the directions are there, but the key first is that you want to make sure that you whisk that pectin into the juice until it's dissolved. And you want to make sure that you bring that to a rolling boil. And when you bring it to a rolling boil, that means that when you whisk it or stir it, the foam or the boiling can't be stirred down. So it's at a pretty high boiling rate. You want to boil for 1 minute, and then you're going to stir constantly and remove that from the heat. Then you're going to add your blackberries to the mixture, stirring vigorously for 1 minute, and then you're going to add your sugar. This recipe, you can also use a no-calorie sweetener, regular sugar, or honey. Personally, I like honey in this one. And then you're going to fill your plastic freezer jars. You can also use regular glass jars. You just want to make sure that you have a freezer safe jar of whatever kind that is, whether it's plastic or glass. And you want to make sure that you leave enough headspace, because as things freeze, they expand. So you want to make sure that you're not rupturing and breaking your jar, and that you're not obviously having a mess in your freezer. So once you're going to let them set in the refrigerator first before you put them in the freezer. So you do want to set them in the fridge for about a day, 24 hours. And then you can either keep it and serve it as is, or you can put it in your freezer and it'll last in your freezer for about a year. So with that, that is the end of my presentation talking about the nutrition of blackberries, how to preserve them, and also some things to do with them once you harvest them. So if you have any questions, you can always reach me at the Johnson County Extension Office. Here's my contact information. And if you are not already signed up for our In Good Health newsletter, please do sign up to receive monthly recipe as well as other nutrition and kitchen food safety information. Thank you.